This is the tokenization revolution, and I would love to welcome Vicky onto the stage.
Welcome to Tokenization Revolution. Before I get started, disclaimer, all views are my own and not of my employer. I have to say this. Thank you for listening. Next slide. So I'm going to tell you about how we went from the Wild West to design system Starship with tokens. Spoiler alert. A little bit about me. I'm Wiktoria. I work at JPMorgan Chase for Spectrum Design System. I'm one of the design leads for Spectrum Design System. And Spectrum is a platform, an internal platform for asset management. We have over 120 apps and over 4,300 users globally. And this means we have to be really delicate about the way that we roll out changes. It poses a lot of risk. Everything has to be very, very well thought through. So with that context, let's begin. Oh, you can hear me breathing. Okay, so the problems that we were having a year ago, we had an identity crisis. Nobody really knew what even the true app background color should be. We had a problem with synchronicity. Design and code were dancing to two different songs. So we were definitely moving, but not in sync. We had accidentally created a digital hurricane. It was a sad storm of neutrals everywhere, and every design meeting felt like Groundhog Day. Why did this button look different? And what is this random shade of gray? So the problems piled up and a solution was needed. We were in a Wild West era. There was no sheriff in town, meaning that there was no single source of truth. We had language barriers. Figma said tomato, Figma said tomato, engineering heard reddish thing, and designers thought of a random hex code. We were living in a sea of grays. See, now I'm breaking up. It's because of this microphone. I wasn't expecting it. But we were living in a sea of grays, and there was no systematic design about it. It was more systematic confusion. Just like me, I'm systematic confusion. All right, we were living in a component anarchy. So Spectrum Design System has about 60 components, and they were all floating around individual app teams with different looks, different states. There was zero governance. Every team had their own unique solutions, so there were wild variations to how each type ahead or how each button looked. Design would interpret code with various levels of accuracy, and engineers would interpret designed code. Everyone was drifting further and further apart. So there was so many divergence and so many problems. And so we were living in isolated nations, right? There was unique solutions everywhere. For each similar problem, everyone had chosen to solve it differently. The Figma was like a building block, meaning that everyone was recreating these solutions and not reusing them like a design system should. Same challenge, different solutions meant that there was an increase of inefficiency and inconsistency across the product ecosystem. And so I want to show you an example of this. Now, because this is an internal product, I can't show you many screenshots. I'm sorry. I wanted to create really nice, crazy visuals. However, I'll just show you the modal component that we had. This was a published modal component in our Figma component library, and it had 4 different sets of tokens and a random hex code for some spice. So from this little example, it was clear to us that we couldn't just hack at the leaves, but dig at the roots of the problem. We were part of the problem. And you can imagine the snowball effect that this had on app teams, over 120 of them, and then at the end for the end users as well. There was no structural integrity for scalable and maintainable products. We were living in the dark ages, but the problem needs to be understood to be solved, right? So we audited just our neutrals at the start, just the grays, and no giggles. but we found over 50 shades. Now, we playfully at work called it the sea of grays. We couldn't call it the other thing. There was a proliferation of similar values, because this was just the grays. You can imagine the rainbow of colors that we were living in. But this proliferation of similar value means that consistency was lost, sanity was lost, and confidence in making design decisions was nowhere to be seen. Teams spent time trying to pick the right hex code instead of spending their energies on coming up with actual impactful design solutions. And so it was time for the revolution and an intervention. We had a strategic focus on 3 key areas: the color standardization, the token architecture, and component systemization. We didn't want to just build new components with all the new fancy Figma features. We wanted to redesign the infrastructure from the atoms to the elements. And we knew that for speed and efficiency, we wanted to lift and shift a color palette and find a token schema to fit the current implementation of code, meaning minimal restructuring, but could also flex and scale into any future improvements that we wanted to make. And we chose Radix to do this because it had built-in accessibility with proper contrast ratios, at scales to eliminate subjective color choices, and seamless light and dark mode. And so we come to the token renaissance, which was an age of rediscovery and rebuilding. We mapped Radix colors to our existing components. We identified inconsistencies, patterns, and gaps. And we defined the foundations based on the patterns that we saw. We weren't thinking about semantic roles yet, just the underlying structure. And this took a really, really long time, 60 components, various looks, loads of colors. But that groundwork set us up to later define roles and meaning in our semantic layer. Fellow history nerds know that after the Renaissance came the age of absolutism, which was an end of feudal fragmentation and the rise of central figures of nation states. And so behold, the new structure and architecture, a hierarchy that Louis XIV would have been proud of, if I do say so myself. So we had the foundational layer, which puts an order and name to our hex codes. We have the semantic layer, which gives them a purpose, which allows us to have multiple modes and theme support. And you can see the little before and after as well, the little mess that we had. This would get rid of fragmentation and align all of the teams around the purpose of the color. And here's a little bit of our secret sauce, which were bridge tokens. They are grouped intermediate tokens in the semantic layer of our variable system. And that means that a background color, for example, on the semantic layer, instead of referencing straight back down to gray 11 on the foundational layer, it references groups like neutral, danger, or warning. And that means that if we ever want to shift all of those colors, so if we don't want gray anymore, we want sage, we only need to change that one group and the entire semantic layer shifts automatically. And this means that we had finally some scalable maintenance built into the system. So lane switching magic, and by that I mean flexibility. One semantic token could have different values in different themes. At the foundational level, we defined hex codes to have a light color and a dark color for our modes, dark and light modes. And then on the semantic layer, we could flex for different teams if they have different needs, and that was for our themes. It means that it completely eliminated the need for manual change. The system handles everything automatically, leading to consistency and customization. Yay! The proof is in the modal, because all of those metaphors that I spoke about with the highways, the lanes, and the bridges, they need the vehicles being our components. So we rebuilt the entire Figma component library with all of the 60 components with the tokens built in. We wanted to utilize all the fancy new features, but there were two main goals. We wanted to be tokenized, of course, and connected to React. And so here is the old modal and a new modal in the dark mode and in light mode. The key difference here, apart from looking slightly better, is that the new modal has the same tokens, the same logic, 0 hacks, and 0 tears shed trying to make it built. It meant that designers no longer had to build two completely different screens for light and dark mode. It meant that engineers didn't have to re-implement because there was no connection between the two. We were both finally speaking from the same highway code. And so it kind of feels like we've tamed the Wild West, right? That was the Industrial Revolution. But we didn't want to just build components and be done with it and that's it. We needed for complete comprehensive infrastructure rebuilding. We wanted shared documentation, a long-term alignment. We wanted collaborative processes from the discussion to the handoff, which meant creating a shared language, meaning like, documentation that meant that we had the same property names in Figma as the property names in React. And the UX was involved in PR approval. We were all aware of what was going on. And that was like a city code, right? Some of the things that we involved into our everyday lives were token onboarding guides to encourage adoption. We had Figma to React translations documented and systematic update processes so that the entire team knew if there was a Figma update or if something was changing or adding. And all of that base work and that stable foundation that we built meant that we are finally ready for liftoff. I don't know if you saw in that modal component, that bright orange button. I am so sick of orange. I know my presentation is also orange, but I'm so sick of looking at orange. But that foundation means that we can finally evolve and adapt our user experience and our brand expression. And finally discover what the design system can become. We have flexibility to adjust with modes and themes without compromising the integrity of the system. And most of all, we want to live and evolve like an ecosystem with some nice words on the presentation. We want to be modular, defined, and flexible. And I know that this is a short presentation, but truly this entire thing took over a year. It's been most of my work at JPMorgan Chase. So to recap everything and shorten it down even more so that you can kind of compartmentalize it in your brain, is that we started off in chaos with fragmentation and inconsistency with the little cowboy emoji. Then we industrialized with token infrastructure. And now we want to head to space, with system that can strategically evolve. We went from an operational challenge to a strategic advantage. And so, thank you very much for listening to my slightly anxious mess. You can now take your seatbelts off and remember that, design systems aren't just about the size. It's about how they're evolved when systematic improvements, one at a time.